No, you're on the floor.
Look over here.
Yeah, okay, that works.
Did you do a share with screen?
Not yet. Cause because I gotta show,
Yeah, here we are first.
but I suppose
Here's everybody.
that looks awkward, doesn't it? That's the TV in the background.
What that is?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, oh, well.
Oh, did I? Like, part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, which part?
Should I scoot around too?
Yes. Okay.
Want to sit in the audience, different perspective.
I want to thank you for inviting me here to have a chat or discussion, as the agenda says, with the planning board. Dawn and I, she invited me and asked me if I'd be willing to come, and absolutely, and to discuss the Coxsackie Watershed District organization in general, or you talk about phosphorus control methodologies. And I thought I was going to leave it up to you folks, what you wanted to hear about. I think like the methodology process are pertinent to the planning board and your activity, but I also thought that we have a discussion, lay out some things, and hopefully that would generate questions. Just to have an informal discussion. I did prepare, because I sent out some information for you. I sent out three documents. One of them was the proceedings from a conference I spoke at back in '96 in Chicago, where I presented the early version of the DEP's phosphorus control of lake watersheds. And that was in '96. The first really published edition was back in '92, although they started operating on a draft version in 1989. And it's been refined a couple of times. And now there's the most recent is a 2016 edition, which I sent you volume 2, which is volume 3 is 50 or 60 pages. There's a lot of tables. That wasn't really something to be interested in, but I thought at least you'd be able to see some of the sophistication, but also some of the similarity in the approach taken from way back in the '90s to 2016. And the other document I sent you was, was an article I wrote for Lakeline magazine, a publication of the North American Lake Management Society back in 2007. We don't really have a lot of good literature summarizing the Coxsackie Watershed District. And unfortunately, we don't have a website at the moment. We have a domain name, but we just haven't gone live. And so there's not a lot for people to be able to get a handle on what it is we do, why we were formed, etc. And even though that's 2007, that article, we've been just doing more of the same since 2007. We're continuing to do lake work, is everything else that reported in that article. I would like to point out, which I think is interesting, that was in Lakeline magazine, 2007, and the theme of that magazine was Northeastern lakes. And I was asked to write about that because Coxsackie Lake had been the first lake in the state of Maine that was removed from the state's impaired water body list. And what's interesting about North American Lake Management Society is it was formed in 1980. This was local interest. 1980, before it had a name, it had a big conference of national scientists and academicians and agency people. It was held at the Holiday Inn by the Bay in 1980. And out of that, they formed the North American Lake Management Society. And it's a national organization, international. There's directors also that represent some of the provinces in Canada, 10 in the United States. And the first address for the North American Lake Management Society was, I forget the P.O. box number, it was P.O. Box something in East Winthrop. And the first president was Denny Cook, a Kent State professor. He was elected president at the conference, but the first president-elect, second president, was my predecessor, Tom Gordon. And the society was incorporated in the state of Maine. They changed that since then. Then they moved to Madison and headquarters. Now it's in Colorado. It's a glossy publication, and they also have a journal. It goes to universities and have the Journal of Lake and Reservoir Management. Okay. Journal and a quarterly called Lakeline, which is like just pretty informative magazine. So that's sort of just a little bit of local interest there. So a little local pride. In my office, we have volume 1, volume 1, number 1 of Lakeline magazine, and now that was back in 1981, and now it's publication. Anyways, I'm trying to figure out how I want to lead this. First of all, I think what I'd like to ask is how much time you want to allow me here.
I'm going to leave that up to the chair. Do you want to set a time limit or?
All I have,
An hour and a half?
No, he said an hour.
Oh,
an hour,
an hour. Sorry.
all in favor?
Water.
You can make us.
I think, yeah, I didn't bring really a PowerPoint about the Cobbossee Watershed District specifically. So I think rather than just ramble on about things, I think we'll go through that, the PowerPoint. And hopefully I don't practice this. I don't time myself with I'm try to see how long it's going to take me to go through it. I don't speak through it when I go through it. I think through it. So hopefully I'll be able to remember all the things I want to highlight here. And this is Wilson Pond here in the Cobbossee Watershed District picture taken by co-worker Wendy Danasu. This year is celebrating 50 years on CWG staff. She started in 1975, so I'm the junior, and you're 33 years on. Right. Next. And here's a map of the Cobbossee Watershed District, 217 square miles. There's 28 lakes and ponds. Right now, there's 8 member towns in the Cobbossee Watershed District and 1 utility district, Winthrop Utility District. And the reason we were formed is because poor water quality in Pleasant Pond, which is down in the southeast along Cobbossee, flows into Cobbossee Stream, Cobbossee Lake, and Bestook Lake especially. It's considered one of the most polluted lakes in the state of Maine. And some of the other ones have, were threatened. And I think it makes sense that a central organization should should manage, oversee all of the activities within the watershed rather than each individual municipality having their own staff doing that and just be kind of chaotic, I believe. So I think we've done a pretty good job. Out of the 28 lakes, 7 of our lakes have at one point resided on the section, Clean Water Act, section 603D list, state of Maine, which is the impaired water body list. And there's only like about 35 in the state of Maine, 7 of them were Cobbossee Watershed. Cobbossee Lake's been removed. I believe, I'm probably spending too much time on this slide, but interestingly, an Upper Narrows Pond was on that list as an impaired water body because the bottom water goes anoxic, loses its oxygen, but the water clarity is fine and the phosphorus levels, which causes algae, phosphorus levels aren't high. And so finally, I had to do a total maximum daily load project on it. I did. You have to come up with a plan to get the lake off that list. And a pollutant of concern, they said, was phosphorus, but I said that phosphorus isn't high, but the oxygen is low. But it's not phosphorus that depletes oxygen, it's organic matter, which may be not very high in phosphorus. So they figured, okay, addressing phosphorus isn't going to fix the lake or stop the oxygen from being depleted. So that was removed. Cobbossee's off. Little Cobbossee on the north side of 202 across from Cobbossee was on it. That was removed because we did an analysis there, looked at the historical data. There was no historical evidence, documentation that that lake was ever clean or clear. And it's erratic in its Some years it has really dense algae bloom, some years it doesn't. Those are lakes that are what they call naturally eutrophic, which is enriched. And so it's just the soils and the watershed and that, there's nothing we can do to make it distilled water if that's what people want. But anyways, that's our jurisdiction. It goes down to 100 feet below the New Mill Stream. Yeah.
Did you figure out a way to increase the oxygen, or it's just,
No,
It just is what it is.
there's better option. You can do aeration in lakes and things like that. But so many of our lakes have oxygen depletion. And when you do have oxygen depletion, normally you have phosphorus released from the sediments. The lake is stratified thermally. You have warm water or cold water. Bottom water goes in oxide. Phosphorus is released, chemical release from the bottom sediments. And then any kind of turbulence across that barrier mix up some of that lower water with phosphorus. So when the lake turns over, it's late summer, fall, you have the late summer, late fall, or early fall algae blooms. We don't see that on upper narrows. And the bottom water, even though it's anoxic, isn't high in phosphorus. So it's really not an issue except for if you're a fish, a cold water fish. But they still have good cold water fish in the narrows, and lower narrows, which is attached to
yeah,
has extremely well oxygenated water to 106 feet. It's the second deepest lake in the Coffs watershed. Maranacook's the deepest in Canada County, at 128. But the water, I mean, they've got landlocked sand and everything, lower narrows, and they go back and forth between the lakes. So there's just nothing that would, there's no need to do. Okay, so we were formed back in 1971 under Chapter 95, purpose, protect, improve, conserve the lakes, ponds, and streams, whatever, with the said district, which comprised of the Coffs watershed. And the authority that is granted to us by the legislature, and the legislator, we are the only watershed district in the state, by the way, is to control the level of the water, which is we can, release water, establish water level standards, seasonal that we have, to improve the quality and purity of the water. And this is verbatim from the charter, from the act, and in general, do any and all things incidental to accomplish purposes of the act. We were granted the authority to make rules and regulations, but before my time, the board, the district decided that we have water level standards, but we would rather work in an advisory capacity with municipalities, because you're the enforcers, you're the ones who regulate projects. We act in regular advisory capacity. So next. Maine's water quality standards for lakes, there are no numerical standards like, so many parts per billion of phosphorus or whatever, but generally stable or decreasing trophic state based on a number of parameters. Nutrient levels are one, water clarity or algae blooms, secular transparency is what you may call it, is one thing. And then there's culturally induced obnoxious blue-green algae blooms, which per DEP are defined as when at any time during the summer or the open water season, water clarity drops to less than 2 meters. Obviously, watershed district, we have a 3 meter standard because we consider 3 meters, 10 feet of water that's green. That's a blue algae bloom. So it's just a matter of degree. Next. And in the state laws, it's like no change of land use in a watershed of a class GPA water body may by itself or in combination with any other activities cause an increase in the trophic state of those GPA waters. What I mean is going from what's called an oligotrophic state or a mesotrophic, which is very clear, lowly enriched, or a moderately one, to a eutrophic lake, heavily enriched with nutrients and a lot of algae growth. You can't do that. And so next slide. Because the municipalities, it's my understanding, and I think I knew this really well 30 years ago, but I think in subdivision ordinances that I think municipalities have to at least make some kind of, conditions that there will be no, water quality will be protected. And that, stormwater, et cetera, all your things that, not just water volume runoff, but you cannot cause water quality problems. So they came up with this methodology. This is the cover of the 1992 edition. They did this primarily for them to use as a tool to review at the state level, but also provide municipalities with a guide to try to regulate developments that come before the town, both commercial and resident subdivisions, so that they can maintain water quality and not cause undue pollution. What I was going to say about this more is there aren't that many towns that use this. It's pretty much the state. There's some organizations that do it, maybe Lakes Environmental Association, I'm not even sure they do much of it down in the Bridgeton area. They're a regional group. They're not a district like we are, but it's well recognized at DEP. I mean, we review things that don't even meet the threshold of the DEP review. DEP's subdivision is 15 lots or more. Here it's 3 lots or more. We review subdivisions for Monmouth, Manchester, Winthrop. We review anything that's commercial development. We have a phosphorus review policy that we review things, and we now have a definition for a major development. That's increasing 5,000 square feet and more of impervious area. And anything below that, we don't hold them to a numerical standard of phosphorus export, but we at least make some general recommendations to maybe try to manage their stormwater, direct it to a wooded area, a buffer or something. But the beauty of this is it's very clearly spelled out what something is and how to measure things. And it provides Copsey Watershed District and others with a means to be very objective. There's no subjectivity really in this. It's like every applicant has to follow this. And generally, either it is or it isn't. If it's like over an acre or it's less than an acre or whatever, or the soil, the soils are either whatever. It certainly takes a lot of pressure off me or anyone else doing on our staff doing reviews, is that we're not looking at each applicant and giving them subjective thumbs up or thumbs down. Next slide.
That'd be a good place to explain the purchase. Right?
Oh, we're not there yet.
There, you're gonna.
Yeah. Okay, this is the couple, well, this is just, I'm going to talk about the 2016 edition, which I sent you the volume 2. Okay, next slide.
Does anyone know, just, this isn't necessarily important, but the edges, how to get rid of those so you all can see it's a little busy? Do you know what I'm saying? Like to make it? Yeah,
Yes, viewers, I have no
I
idea.
have no idea.
Okay.
It's not actually PowerPoint, it's just a PowerPoint viewer, so.
okay, then
I
I'm
think that's the
investing
very
it.
best we're going to get.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, so for all the lakes in the state of Maine, pretty much the DEP has established watershed phosphorus budgets. The phosphorus budget is the amount of increase in annual phosphorus load to a lake that can be allowed without risking a perceivable change in the lake's ability to support algae. Next slide. Okay, the watershed phosphorus budget is a function of the lake's water quality and propensity for internal phosphorus loading, whether it's cold water fishery, public water supply. Those particular cold water and a public water supply, those factor into whether you want to have a high, medium, or low level of protection on the lake. Then you set a level of how many parts per billion of phosphorus you're willing to see the lake increase over a 50-year period. And then the flushing rate, the volume of the lake, those play into the retention time and everything within the lake too. Next slide. So this is really where it really starts getting, it brings it down to the local level. The per acre phosphorus allocation or Lakes watershed indicates the amount of annual stormwater phosphorus export that is allocated to each acre of developable land within parcel proposed for development in the Lakes watershed. So we have a development, let's say out here, 10 acres, it's in a watershed, like Anabesic, and you have 10 acres, you're allowed somebody to export off your property, so many pounds per acre per year. And I'm gonna walk you through how we calculate that and how we can reduce it if it exceeds your allowable amount. And it's determined by the acreage of developable land in a parcel. And is called the project phosphorus budget. Next slide. I think. Okay. This is a new formula that it gets to the same number. The original formula that was in my 1996 proceedings, it was when it was E equals FC over D, but that WPB takes into account what's FMC, and I don't want to get into too much detail. I can't see.
Sorry. Someone just entered the,
Right there.
I apologize. I just want to. I apologize if I'm making everyone dizzy.
That's the next slide.
Did I go too far?
Yep, went back.
Gotta get me out of the picture.
Yep.
Disappeared.
Hmm. I can make you very little.
That's better.
How's that?
That's
Okay, sorry about that.
okay. Yeah, WPB is the watershed phosphorus budget, but D, that's for the whole watershed. D is the acreage in the watershed expected to be developed over time. And there's growth parameters depending on what part of the state you're in. That you know, Cumberland County is going to have a higher growth projection over 50 years than, let's say, this part of Maine. And that's done statewide, but within the town's portion of a watershed, D is, all right, let's say you're expecting 25% growth over the next 50 years. Then you'd say, okay, 25% of the watershed will be developed. That's developable. Then out of that, you subtract areas that are steep slope wetlands, because those aren't considered developable.
Next,
Yeah.
sorry.
It applies only to a lake's direct watershed. Upstream lakes, yeah, they have their own allocations. They're calculated, p-values are calculated separately for each town within the lake's watershed based on a percent of the direct land watershed in each town. And the next slide, not yet, the next slide will show you a part of Appendix C that will show you the list of the top lakes and that and what the values are. And that's just the P is just down below the last P values, saying they range from 0.02 pounds per acre per year up to 0.08. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but phosphorus is the limiting nutrient, and when it gets in the lakes, it is the nutrient which is in least supply relative to need by phytoplankton. You can put in nitrogen, carbon in that, you're not going to really promote any more growth. Phosphorus kicks it up, and so it doesn't take much. Next. All right, here's just the first page of Appendix C, and this is there's two appendices. One is alphabetical by lake, and the other one is by town. This one is lake, but it has Winthrop in there. Anabesic Lake, Monmouth, and Winthrop. I don't have a pointer, a laser pointer. Actually, I think I do. I thought actually you had. I didn't bring it because I thought you had a LCD or an LED, and I understand that red lasers are not supposed to be pointed at. They have green lasers for those. If you look at the Anabesic Lake, go all the way over to the far right, and the second column from the right, per acre phosphorus allocation, that's the p-value. You can see for Monmouth, Anabesic, it's the 0.034 pounds per acre per year. For Winthrop, it's 0.029. And I know I just was here like a month or so ago, and there's a development that's expanding. I know they're going to DEP. They're in the Anabescook watershed. I won't name them here right now, but their allocation is 0.02. Sounds pretty. Next slide.
How can you have two different numbers for the same watershed?
Pardon?
How can you have two different numbers?
Because it's based on town's relative proportion of the
Oh, does it
watershed.
break the watershed based on the town boundary? That's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
That's stupid, but that's okay. I mean, because you have two different allocations to the same watershed, why would you have that? I mean, I guess you're limiting it by town, but that just seems silly. You should have it by watershed.
well, this is what DEP
I,
came up with.
I know why that's okay. Just saying it's stupid, that's okay. Well, I mean, it's just being, it's by watershed, sorry, I live in that world. It should be by watershed, period, end of story, it should be one number, it shouldn't matter. So. To have two different numbers is like, oh, you move that house over and it's in another town, they get a different ratio, that doesn't make any sense. Should be the limiting factor of the watershed. So, sorry. You keep going. I just thought it was weird. It was dumb.
I understand it is, but it's been a long day for me, and I'm sort of saying that if I hadn't anticipated this question, I would have spent some time trying to give you a good answer. All right. All right, it's a maximum amount of algal available phosphorus in a typical year may be exported. That's the budget though, for the phosphorus budget. This is for a project. May be exported to stormwater from the new development. And algal available phosphorus in the original methodology, the one that I sent you my proceedings from 96, they used to report it as total phosphorus, but then you had to multiply it times 0.5 because basically 50% of the total phosphorus is algal available. The rest is generally, especially if it's erosion and sediment, it's tied up in apatite or hydroxyapatite. You have to, you determine the bioavailability by doing what's called a sodium hydroxide extraction. That would be bioavailable. Now, with the new methodology, they don't make you do the that adjustment. They can just have it listed in bioavailable. Right, next. So let's say we're a developer, I'm a developer, and I want to know how much phosphorus I can export from my project. The PPB is my budget. The developable area is the developable area of my parcel. And I multiply that times my P value, which is per acre phosphorus allocation, and that will give me, next slide. That
So when you do your total development area, who would make the determination of what was the steep slopes?
Well, generally, I haven't seen steep slopes taken out too much because that generally has to be like at least a couple acres of greater than I think 20% slope.
20% grade.
And I don't see many development
No.
coming onto those, onto that. Wetlands, generally, most developers already, they already have their wetlands
But they use
marked.
wetland inventory or do they field survey? Because I've seen it done both ways and that's why I'm trying to ask them.
No, I think, yes, I think if they do their own inventory, we go with what they inventory, but I think the methodology states as shown on the wetland map.
Nationally.
Yeah, the national inventory.
And
yes.
I'm just saying, as a town, should we request that now?
I don't think I don't think you're gonna submit an application for a subdivision using NWI mapping. They're gonna have to go up to the Army Corps.
You make them do
I
it.
will,
They make them do it.
yes, yeah,
Okay, because
I'm pretty sure
this is a huge project, it's not very, the mapping. is not-
absolutely. And I think
So I get
the
the
regulator.
That's why I was kind of asking about that, it's like, what should we be asking for here? And it sounds like they're gonna be doing their DEP permits, so they're gonna go out and do their own inventory.
My guess is the language states that, at a minimum, you have to use what the NWI unless field evidence, field inspections
Right,
reveals otherwise, could show that either the NWI maps were incorrect or,
right,
or that there's even more wetland and you go with whatever they come up.
right. We came in with one a few years ago that they'd done their inventory in December or January when there was snow on the ground. And I was like, I don't think that was a good idea. So I'm just,
It was maybe for them.
well, that's what I mean. It was one of those, I was kind of questioning at the time, but I was new to the board and I was kind of like, that doesn't sound right. And now I would have been a little bit harder on them. And like, I don't think so.
Good,
Good.
next slide. Yeah,
Once the project's all done, how do you actually measure to see what the act?
you don't. These are all based on models and studies. One of the big ones was a I think 1985 study that DEP put together, Jeff Dennis, who was one of the principal authors of the original methodology. They did, side-by-side drainage areas, from the same soil areas, like in a subdivision area in Augusta. It was adjacent to similar terrain. It was totally vert, and you were able to collect runoff in a concentrated area, collected a large area, and look at things that made a difference. And also, there's been other published literature whose phosphorus export coefficients assigned land use. There's been a lot of them, but at least the studies have been done here in Maine to be able to say that we're using Maine data, rather than something from North Carolina. Ken Retkow was a huge scientist engineer down at Duke University who came up with a model called Utramod that is really sophisticated, but it's a lot of the data. We look at the sources, the source of all the data, a lot of it's agriculture or Southeast United States. So we had to look at something that's more akin to our geology and our ecology. So this is a finished, I had to take all the animation out of these slides. This is for like an 8-hour workshop. And I'd have to go, next slide would go 0.057, then 40, then 4, then 1, and then give you the 35. So I'm giving you the finished product here. The watershed per acre allocation is 0.057 pounds per acre per year. Total acreage is 40. Subtract out 4 acres for wetlands, steep slope, 1 acre. They got 35 acres developable. You multiply 35 times 0.057. Your allowed phosphorus budget is 1.995 pounds per year from your whole development. So next slide. Estimating that export is you estimate to get the phosphorus export when it's all done is you estimate the pre-treatment phosphorus export. Most likely you have to incorporate best management practices, and I'll explain some of those. Then you estimate the post-treatment project export, post-PPE, which has to be no more than what your allowable budget was. So next slide. For a non-residential, commercial one, next slide will show work. No, next slide will show work too. You identify the areas with discrete land use types in your development. Your area of parking, your area of road. Those can be different exports depending on whether there's gravel or paved. The roof area and lawn by soil group. Those are generally the only phosphorus exporters that we're concerned about. Patios, sidewalks would all be about the same as roof. Very inert, very just impervious area. Then you determine the acreage of each of those land use types. You multiply each area by the appropriate phosphorus export factor from table 3.1. We'll get to that. Then you sum up the resulting export values and you compare the phosphorus budget. You compare it with, that would be your PPE, your pre-phosphorus, pre-PPE. What I mean by pre, it means before you do anything to try to treat it, cut it back. You compare it to your allowable budget. Next. Okay, these are some export coefficients, or these are export coefficients for commercial development and subdivisions, but only in the context of a subdivision. Things like roof and that would only be used in a subdivision if the developer of the subdivision is doing all of the building and knows exactly the size of the homes. If you're selling just lots, the private property owners are going to build, and we'll get to how you treat that. But this is primarily for commercial. And if you can see there's 4 main hydrologic soil groups. A is the best draining, and B is okay. C is the most common one that we find around here. And D, are hydric soils or draining, silty clays or silty loams, clay loams and things like that. C is like I say, the most common. Now, you can use either a low export option or a high export option, depending on whether you're gonna have restrictions in your deeds or in approval, you know, that, whether fertilizers are gonna be restricted, or if the roads and driveways are gonna be paved. And paving now is considered, they used to be the same as gravel by DEP standards. Now, paving, at least for roads, is preferable. If you go down to roads and driveways, you can see an acre of paved road, the low export is 1.25 pounds per acre per year. But if it's not paved, it's 1.75. It's a gravel road. Parking is the same for both. And it's not as heavily compacted. And it's probably not accumulating emissions or anything else that's gonna leave the site. You know, pretty much everything that's gonna go on the asphalt or pavement is going to wash off. But a lot of your gravel is gonna wash off and take the same pollutants as well. And roofs are pretty tame. And what I find interesting is that roofs, you know, it's impervious, but if you look up hydrologic soils, you can see, interestingly, the high export, if you're allowing phosphorus fertilizer on the right, it's 0.6 pounds per acre, rooftop is less. So even though you got lawn and, you know, rain is gonna be able to infiltrate into the soil, it's still less of a phosphorus generator, or I'll call it a generator, than roofs. Frankly, it's not the roofs that are, you know, exported phosphorus, is because of the imperviousness of the roof that you're causing more runoff, that's causing more soil erosion downstream, down. So, next slide. Okay, here's a worksheet for the Good Intentions Business Mall. It's a commercial operation. They've got 2 parking areas. One's 2 acres, 1.5. Both of them are to 1.25. Because they have pavement for them, so they got the low export value, even though parking would be 1.25 anyways. And access road, that's paved, so you see low export, that's also 1.25. The building, 1.5 a building, 0.5. The whole total from that free phosphorus export is 5.9. Next slide, pounds per year. Now, this is looking at single family residences, and then we're going to compare like a commercial and a resident subdivision. Hydrologic soil group is very influential on what the export coefficient will be from each house lot. This is from each lot. And this is where the property owner is building the home, the developer isn't. So we're not keeping track of how big the roof is or anything. We're not going to try to itemize it by lawn area. But you do have restrictions on cleared area. So if you're going to limit your cleared area to less than 12,000 square feet and your driveway or your parking area to less than 17,500 square feet, depending on whether you are going to divert 75% of your drive and parking area to a buffer or you're not, those are your coefficients depending on the soil use on the 2 columns on the left. I'm reviewing a subdivision right now in Monmouth off Academy Street, right off of 282 at the north end. And it's going to be like almost very small lots, and it's going to be affordable housing. And everything's going to be under 12,000 square feet. And they're going to have restrictions on fertilizer. So they're using the 0.15. It's C soils. But they can range up pretty high if you're in really bad soils like a D. And I don't want to say D's are bad, but they're bad for this type of thing. And you're not having any restrictions, you can go all the way up to 0.34 pounds per house lot. Next slide. Okay, so here's an example of tallying up the phosphorus from a sweet home subdivision. I notice it looks kind of busy. Let's say you got lots 1 through 4, they have no restrictions and they're not sending anything to the buffer. They have a 0.24 export per lot. 0.96 total. Lots 5 through 10, they're less than 10,000 square feet. They're in a different soil, by the way, too. They're C without 75% the buffer. They get a 0.2. They're 1.2 total, on and on and on. You see the driveways are 1.25. I don't know exactly what this road 1A, uphill side, downhill side. But the road, they're using a 1.25. And so their pre-phosphorus is 3.17. Next slide.
They didn't have all the driveways. I'm assuming that's just an example.
Was it?
They only had driveways for like number 2 and 3. You had 12 lots.
Oh, because anything, I missed that. I mean, I saw it earlier. Glad you picked it up on that. Because any driveway that is longer than 150 feet is treated as a new road. So then you treat it like road.
Okay, so otherwise it's just included.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
You get the first 150 for free.
Okay.
After that, then you're
It's
assessed.
designed to expect that.
Right, okay. That's a good point, thanks. Okay, reducing the phosphorus export. Project budget for a home sweet home was 1.995. Pre-treatment was 3.17, therefore it exceeds its budget. It needs, phosphorus export needs to be reduced. Next slide. Reducing phosphorus export, a couple different approaches. You can redesign it, limit the scope, reduce the number of lots, reduce the length of the roads, size of the parking areas, relocate development areas on the best soils on the lot or in the development area and the shallowest slopes, because buffers, I don't know if I'll get to that, but buffers, the treatment factors, is 0 to 8% is preferred, and 9 to 15, you get less treatment factor in a buffer. So you want nice, gentle slopes. Incorporate clearing or other restrictions, or else you can provide BMPs to treat the stormwater buffers. That's the preferred approach, always. I'm reviewing a huge subdivision. All I'll say is 62 lots and, it's dense. And they're not using buffers. They're proposing not to use buffers. And they're using under drain soil filters, which are like the next one, vegetated soil filters. But what they overlooked was that, and they want to pay a compensation fee because they can't meet their phosphorus budget. What they missed in the whole methodology is that if you're dealing with a residential subdivision, you're not eligible to go to compensation fee route. If all you can use is buffers. You have to use either forested or meadow buffers, not use engineered systems. You know, and I think part of that is even if you have a homeowners association, a lot of these infiltration systems are spattered about. It's hard to see if they're being maintained, inspected. You can tell if the forest was being cut down. You know, if you have your marked up buffers, and buffers will work forever if they're made, if we just leave the woods alone. Vegetative soil, wet ponds and filtration and storm tree. And storm tree, I'll show you a picture of storm tree. You guys probably see it every day, if you go to Walgreens or you go to Hannaford. And reducing export is often cited like that. Okay, next. These are the list of types of BMPs. And just want to say is that there's a minimum treatment factor. The lower the number, the better, because 0.3 means that you're removing 70%. 0.1 means you're removing 90%. You can't get to 0. And just because you can say, I'll have 1,000-foot buffer, you don't get there. It's like, once you get to about 200 feet buffer, they cut you off for treatment. And so you can see they're pretty strict. Infiltration can get you to 0.1 because you're essentially making it disappear, going into the ground, and it's not going. Under drain soil filters, it is exiting system. It's infiltrating through some engineered soil media and into an infiltrated pipe. It's infiltrated pipe at some point, it's been treated, and then that water is removed. You can get down to 0.15. So So what you got is you got wet detention basins, single ponds, two ponds, et cetera, under drain soil filters and others, infiltration, vegetated buffers. And, as you can see, looking at the soil, A or B, C, two different kinds of Cs, and D, look at the treatment factors. The best you can do in D, soils is a 0.4, which means you're only removing 60%. You gotta have a really long buffer in D to get 60% removal, get that. And in a meadow buffer, you're not even allowed to do it. That's also the problem that this subdivision I'm reviewing is up against. The whole 62 lot subdivision is on D soils and it's not wooded. So even if they wanted to use a wooded buffer, the woods aren't there. So they can't use metal buffers. That's
Just planting trees.
well, you know what? I don't offer that up too much because I'm not really confident that's gonna be in my lifetime.
Well, well, they also need to plant trees and let the entire forest grow up.
Oh, yeah.
You can't just plant trees, have a mulching around it. That's not solving the problem, because then you have lawn all the way around it.
You have to reforest.
Exactly, you have to reforest it, like stop mowing, let it sit for 10 years and then see what happens.
Yeah, I try not to offer that up, but I do my best to help consultants, engineering companies and that, because I'll tell you, a lot of engineers, they know how to design wetlands, ponds, and that, but they get tripped up on some of the ecological aspects because they're not ecologists, they're not biologists. And, but I don't offer, I love having pre-app meetings, because I like it when I sit down with them before they have blueprints made, invest a lot of their clients' money into doing this plan, thinking I've got it right, that they sit with me or they sit with DEP and they say, this is what we want to do. This is the approach we're going to take. If we get, here we're at point A, we want to get to point Z. If we take this approach, is this acceptable? At least then you can start your work, And I offer up suggestions, but I usually won't surrender that one. It's like, oh, you can just say that you're going to grow a forest. No, but it's in there that you can revegetate. So anyways, what do we got here? This is, okay, residential. Okay, this is this is post. Okay, they've put in, you can see, if it's a 1.0, we'll get the BMP treatment factor in that blue vertical column in the middle there. If it's 1, it means there's no treatment, like you see in the far right. 0.4 means they have a 50-foot forested buffer. And that's the standard, that's the minimum of treatment is 0.4. The other ones, lots 1 through 12, I'll point out, you see that there's no treatment. And RDA2 on the left, road A2 and road B are going to a buffer 0.4, so they're exporting 2.15. Next slide. This is after they did their treatment or their first run. Well, they were only allowed 1.995. Post-treatment, they're at 2.15. So it exceeds the phosphorus budget. Back to the drawing. Next slide. So they can add BMPs to the areas that don't have treatment. They can use more effective BMPs, different ones, bigger ones, eliminate, again, all the things. Mitigation, credits for elimination, reduction or treatment of existing sources. You do get credit for reducing existing sources. If you already have, let's say, a gravel road that's not being used, but it's on your property and you say you're going to revegetate that, you can remove that. Generally, you calculate how many pounds of phosphorus that road is worth and you get half that credit. You don't get full credit. And then compensation. And that would be, like I say, compensation fees. But you're only eligible for paying a compensation fee. Again, I mentioned in a residential subdivision, all you're allowed to use is buffers to be able to use compensation. But there's a lot of compensation fee projects out there that are mostly commercial. And you're only allowed to do it if you at least treat, remove, or eliminate 60% of your phosphorus. So you at least have to have 0.4 treatment for your whole project. That's the starting point. And I'll just say now, if you can get to a 0.75 or a 0.25 treatment factor, 75, your fee is dropped from $25,000 a pound of phosphorus that you're above your budget down to 12,500, so half your fee per pound is left, half. Next. So this, they came back, and the only thing that I can tell that really happened here is that lots 1 through 2 that did not have treatment before now have a 75-foot lot metal buffer. And they're getting a 0.4 treatment factor. My guess is, oh, that's a metal buffer, okay, not a forested buffer. So see, the one above it, if it's blue, that's a 50-footer forested buffer. It gets a 0.4, but it takes a 70-foot buffer in a meadow. You get to 0.4, and now it's down to 1.970. Next. Okay, so now they were allowed 1.995, now they're 1.970, and now home sweet home means its budget. Next. Oh, yeah,
But that really means they can't make any changes to those different buffers, those different setbacks. Because they built that into their equation, and so I mean, a lot of times I think they're buying those lots assuming they're all the same, and clearly they're not gonna be. Some of them have buffers, some of them don't.
some of them, you're right.
So it's, and I don't think we've seen a subdivision like that clearly laid out. Maybe they were in the calculations, but you don't see that on the map.
Could be, now, we've always pretty much recommended that they're shown on the plan. And generally, look, one of the things that we don't have the time to do, and I don't, is to then 6 months after, I don't know when the thing's gonna be built, if it's lot by lot or something, go out and see if the buffers have been maintained. And generally, we also require, not only are they shown on a map, but they're staked in the field and flagged, so that the property owner knows that this is a no-touch zone. No, you can't do AT details, you can't do anything to a buffer. And when can it was channelized, or, yeah, okay. Now, this is an example of one of the projects we did here in Winthrop. This is back in early 2000s. That's Rite Aid when it was just built. Those are storm treat units there. Those are self-contained wetland systems. They have filtration in them. These are in a series. It's running in a grass swale all the way to the back, and there's in the back there's a little basin, a wet pond, and actually there's a V-notch concrete weir back there that we had put in because we got a grant to monitor this system for a year, 2 years during some heavy storms to see how effective this system was versus what the manufacturers claim for this system. And these are pretty neat systems. When I worked in Massachusetts in consulting in the 80s, Scott Horsley, who worked for a company in Cape Cod, he was a Tufts adjunct professor, but he came up with these, and now you see them everywhere. There's a whole line of them along 202 by Hannaford. If you go to you can see them all down there. And Ryan Chamberlain's place over here has a couple. And I'm not seeing a whole lot of them being installed much anymore. I don't know how, Brian Sylvester, who used to own EcoCycle in Manchester on Puddle Dock Road, and also Sylvester Excavating, he was one of the only purveyors of these in Maine. Similarly to this Rite Aid, the Rite Aid in Manchester has it as well, right along 202. Next slide.
So question, I apologize. What is the name of that feature?
Of the system,
Yeah,
Storm Tree,
Storm Tree. So
Yeah.
that's a brand name.
brand name. It's
Okay.
it's all one word, Storm Tree.
Thank you.
Storm treat units, yeah. And the other big project that we reviewed was the Winthrop High School when it first came up. We reviewed it, but not to the detail that DEP did. This was a huge site location of development project, but we had reviewed. I mean, I still reviewed it for the planning board. Generally, I didn't get into a lot of the stormwater stuff, the HydroCAD stuff, because I'm not an engineer. I can't verify. I can't run programs to see if their results are. I can look and see if the input data makes sense on curve numbers and everything else, but I generally just look at the phosphorus export. That's what we're most concerned about. But this one here, I also reviewed the way back at the middle school when they were putting some athletic fields back in the mid-90s. And those had to be reviewed because they were removing forest and putting in grass, phosphorus generation. And DEP didn't realize that they were reviewed at the local level. And in translation, there was a confusion. And DEP gave them, and then they had to put some, they put treatment systems in for the athletic fields at the middle school. DEP said, oh, you did this? Oh, we'll give you credit and apply it to this project. And I said, no. They were required, you'll give them credit for something that they needed to do at the local level. Anyways, what I want to point out about this one, back then, phosphorus export, any compensation fees were, when they first established, and it was right around the time they were first established, were set at $10,000 a pound of phosphorus above what you're allowed. And I wrote a proposal. This is people right now, for about 20 years, we've been the stormwater administrator for DEP. So for all the lakes in the Copsey Watershed District, when applicants go to DEP for site location or stormwater permits and they have to pay a compensation fee, DEP doesn't handle the money anymore. So there's only 3 lakes that we have accounts. We have to have Woodbury Pond in Tacomas, Anabescook, Copsey, Kennebec Savings Bank. I have to sign off on the fees, send an invoice or a receipt to DEP, then the department order is released. We have that money. We can't just use that money as we see fit. We still have to write a proposal to DEP to say this is how we want to spend the money to do the compensation, the mitigation that the applicant isn't doing. So it's like, money's in my piggy bank, but I have to ask Dad how it's okay to spend it a certain way. But that was 5.5 pounds almost over its it's allowed phosphorus budget, so it's 5.4 pounds. So the compensation fee was $54,000. And so when that went into that was when DEP handled the money. And there were no guidelines on how to write a proposal to use it. There were no stormwater administrators designated in the state. And I realized there's $54,000 here, Anabescook Lake. Dorothy Egg Farms had expanded back then, had to pay a $33,000 fee. And there was a couple other projects, not in Anabescook, but in Cobbossee Lake Watershed, that totaled $109,000. And I started thinking, let's find out how we can collect this money, bring it back to the town. And I think I told you guys this story before, but I had seen a great presentation at a North American Lake Management Society in Madison, Wisconsin, that they had done on Lake Mendota and Madison around that, in that watershed where they did urban street sweeping and showing the results of how beneficial that was. And I knew the money that was in Anabescook alone wasn't going to come very close to buying a street sweeper for the town. So I asked if we could combine Cobbossee and Anabescook, because Anabescook flows into Cobbossee. But then we also did, the town, Winthrop also agreed, got into a contract actually with the DEP, and they're still under that contract. It's perpetuitous, whatever, that's the right way. The Sweet Turtle Run Road down by the condos on the north end of Cobbossee. But it was $107,000. Cornell Knight was town manager, and they found a demo street sweeper. Next slide. Dusty, a Johnston 770 Cyclone, which was a regenerative air cyclone, which is a lot better than straight street sweeping with mechanical. You can't see it, but underneath the front of the cab, there's a thing that sprays water that wets this. You can see someone, he's probably going up and down and see streaks. You wet it because you don't want it just to keep the dust up. And then there's the brushes up front, right behind the brushes in front of the rear wheels. Those are huge suction vacuums, and it pulls it up. And it had a stainless steel hopper, which is good, salting our roads more. And that thing lasted 20 years or so. And it's paid off huge for investment in water quality. I'll tell you that, it really has. And 4 years ago, maybe, Jeff Obrock was manager, and Linda, what's her name, was over in Monmouth. It was $57,000 we had, from RSU2, the school over in Monmouth, their new school, was a big compensation fee. And so I sat down with both Monmouth and Winthrop managers, and because they were working jointly on this one as well, because Monmouth would use this part of the time. They would pay into the escrow into for replacement and or repairs. And so now Winthrop has a new one that's maybe 2 years, 3 years old, and that's even higher tech than this. It's nice. It's full vacuum. That one was $250,000. The $57,000 or 50, whatever it was that we were able to provide was actually the town's first installment down payment on it for the first year. So it's nice to be able to bring the money back. I know some people in the town were unhappy that we were supportive of the $54,000 fee that they had to pay for the compensation, but streets aren't as dusty. You don't have to, close your eyes when you walk around a corner or go around the mill and get, wind tunnel coming at you. That's been a great BMP. Next slide, I think it might be it. Nope. This is Anabesicook. I think in my article, I wanted to point out some, okay, yeah, I'm almost done. If you look, this is only up through 2013, and we started collecting data in 1975. And if you look at the 4 meters on the left there, 4 meters, never once until 2000 did Anabesicook water clarity average 4 meters or better. And we've been robustly monitoring it with the same technique for all these years, every month from May through October. And all of a sudden in 2000, the lake cleared up. And then it stayed over 4 for like 9 years in a row, over 4 meters. And it continued on. And every so often in a bad year, we got a really wet year with a lot of runoff and a lot of erosion. But by and large, it's still at about that kind of, it averages around 4. And it's not improving anymore, but what I think happened is that I don't want to attribute it all to our activities, or I think shoreline zoning has been one of the greatest things Maine's ever done. It's kind of arresting, stopping the continued development along the lakes. Once they did that, I think then we had a fighting chance. But Anabesicook used to receive about 30,000 pounds of phosphorus per year from Winthrop sewage. They used to dump sewage treatments, disinfected. That was it, primary treatment in Anabesicook. But that's a lot of phosphorus went into the sediments. And like I say, in the summertime, the lake is stratified, bottom waters are anoxic, phosphorus is released. Anabesicook flushes 3.5 times a year, Copsey once. But Anabesicook flushes, release, flush, release, flush. If you don't put any more in, over time, it purges. And we've gotten it down, and we did a regression analysis looking at how much per year, because we sample pretty discreetly depths and then get a volume weighted phosphorus at the release. It's dropped off, but I think it's probably plateaued to that point. But I just want to show you benefits of that is next slide. This is I looked at Anabesicook water clarity and property values. The black line is the water clarity, the average water clarity. 1997, this is data that I obtained from the State Bureau of Taxation for shorefront property in the Cobbossee watershed. This is Anabesicook, but I received it for all towns. I was interested in all 8 towns of the district, all the lakes. But this is Anabesicook. Back in 1997, all of the property, this is Winthrop only, not Monmouth. Winthrop, Anabesicook was 9 million, almost 10 million, 9.7. There was another reval done in 2009. And as you can see, property value for Anabesicook increased over 30 million. It went up over 200%. And tripled essentially. All of the other lakes, I don't have them on here. Cobbossee, the values for all, they all went up around 2.5 times, which is that you see the 20 at the 25 would have been 20 foot. So that crosshatch in the 2009 is if Anabesicook's property value had increased the same as Cobbossee, Maranacook, Narrows, and the others, it would have only gone up to 225. Those other lakes did not improve greatly at all, significant over that period. But at 2000, also in Anabesicook, clarity dropped. And I know realtors that tell me is that property the sales are going crazy. They can take people down to Anabesicook to a property, walk out on the dock in August, and they can go up 15 feet out on the end of the dock, look down and see bottom.
Never before was that possible years ago. And it's not because there's any new building. If you try to look at building permits, there's not a lot of new shoreland building on Anabosco Lake. These are existing homes that their values have gone up. I think that might be my last slide. That's my take home message when I meet with towns and say this is the assessment, the increase in assessment for, well, I can't afford, say, you know what, it's worth it to you. Property values.
Ready for question?
Yeah. How are we doing? 7 o'clock is wrong.
Right up, not talking. Right up.
I'll take any questions.
So, great example of using that modeling for a specific subdivision, a development. What are the impacts that we are causing by issuing conditional use permits for 30% expansions, for new decks and a driveway, and how does that all play into the overall budget that you establish for those? Is it a de minimis impact?
Well, it's minimus, relatively, it's like, the methodology is not meant to be used for single family residents.
I understood.
If someone has a third of, 3/4 of an acre lot, they probably wouldn't, unless they have engineering, they probably wouldn't be able to meet the phosphorus set. For just that small area. Number one, also, there would be a lot of review time on my part, a lot of engineering that they'd have to do. I like to think that, I like to have faith, because, I mean, we used to do code enforcement for the town. I went to 2006. I was assistant CEO, Beth Young was CEO. We had 2 of us that were certified. I was for 14 years, and I believe in shoreline building. And I believe there was at least some logic and wisdom put into that. And if something is at least built and complies with the shoreline zoning rules, I just have to let that be enough that we're not worried about it.
Okay.
I do, and I've mentioned this before, and I mentioned it to Don. You probably have a lot more busy activity on shoreline zone than expansions and things like that I have time to go site visits and review. Monmouth, that's always been something that they've asked us to do. But if I do 6 a year over there, that's one thing. I'll bet you I do 20 something here, 25 a year. But we're not trying to meet a phosphorus standard there. That this is where it would just be general EMPs. They look at low impact development techniques, lid techniques like maybe infiltration trenches below the drip line, or gutters, although they're not always great, but and then downspouts or something and direct it over to a wooded buff or to maybe a swale that goes to a wooded area. So it's not just coming off your drip line or the back, whatever, going down the lawn. Hopefully you don't have too much lawn. It's the shoreline zone. I mean, that's probably a significant contributor, the phosphorus to the lakes. I think septic systems, in my own opinion, I think now that there's a stricter plumbing code on those, I'd like to think that a properly functioning septic system absorbs phosphorus, a leach field. It's a good thing it's phosphorus because phosphorus absorbs the soils and silts and that, but nitrogen, it has a free ride.
Yeah.
And for the most part, but that's not really the limiting nutrient in the lake. Well, I've done littoral interstitial pore water sampling, combined that with seepage meters on lakes when I was in Massachusetts. We published stuff and we would look at undeveloped areas and in front of camps, cottages, depend on the soil types. Out of our pore water extractions, and would multiply it times the seepage volume over so many hours or a day and come up with loadings on that. If it's sandy soils, you'd see phosphorus. If it was, and I'm not, that's a generalization. And if it's not sandy, you don't see as much. Or the pore water, would it be any different than, let's say, lake concentrations? And I like to think properly maintained and functioning septic systems are doing about the best they can do. And I think they get I'm not saying a bad rap, but I think too many people, I think it's a cop out sometimes for people that point at storefront owners say, it's their septic systems. We're not the ones doing it. And
So,
it's-
so for us as a board, as a lay board, BMPs is what we should be focusing on to try to create buffers, maintain buffers, expand buffers.
Yes, yes, I think so. You know, it's like one of my rules of thumb is like, at least when I'm dealing with individual property owners and people come in all kinds of personalities and temperaments. And, I try not to impose things upon them that they're not willing to actually do. That's why I like to be at site visits rather than, I like to talk to property owner and tell them why this is a good thing. And would you be willing to do this? Then the planning board can make it a condition. But you know, it's, because a lot of that is not required unless, like the case you guys have going on over on Walsh's Point, where, you know, you're moving it back. Well, if you put in the foundation, if you can move it, you gotta move it to the maximum practical extent.
Right.
That's one thing, but if they're just doing a 30% expansion or whatever, it is allowed. It's kind of hard to say, well, over in the corner over here, there's nothing to do with this. We'd like you to do something about this area or plant some more things there. And you can do that.
that's ideal time for us to try to do that.
That's right, but that's what I like to, but again, I try not to impose them on people. Because, you know, I think over the long run, you're not, the benefits aren't gonna be as good as what the harm could be if word gets out. The local government is forcing things on us too much. I've heard for so many years, we had a bad rap. We did code, some guys who, you know, contractors couldn't talk to Beth. And it was all obviously watershed district won't let us do anything. I'll tell you the truth. I don't think there's any development that wasn't completed and successful. That was because of us, that wasn't developed because of us. A lot of them are because it might be because of the methodology, is what I'm getting at too. It's like, I didn't make the rules and regulations.
Right.
But it's a lot of times they're downsized. If you read my proceedings from that conference, I highlighted the Bailey Hill subdivision, it was out here on 135. It was the first big one I reviewed here, and that was going to be 109 lots originally, and affordable housing. Well, the town of Winthrop adopted a cluster housing ordinance for that subdivision. The Winthrop then Water District applied for and received the Maine State Housing Authority grant of, I think, $400,000, if I recall correctly, from water and sewer down 135 to where the big solar farm is now by Fort Bailey, that church and that Friends Church, whatever there. And because you're not going to have 109 lots on leach fields, septic systems and wells, but and they have eventually, the developer downsized it to about 80 lots. And it was in two watersheds, Narrows and Cobbessy, it was perched up there. And what happened was the developer let his permit expire. He got approval here in town, and I think he got it from the state. And it was either his permit expired or the grant from MSHA for with utility or water district expired, and it never developed. But they made concessions. There's got to be some give and take. It's like you got to do it right. I mean, we're not against development. Just do it right. That's really.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Right. Yeah, so I think you touched on this, but you mentioned, so it's 5,000 square feet or bigger commercial, that's where you review.
That's where we review.
Sort of a threshold.
That's where you would have to meet the phosphorus methodology comes out.
But if it's smaller than that, then it's not necessarily a concern.
Right, but we still like to review the developments, the commercial ones, for general best management practices, similar to what we would do at a shorefront development. Now, Now, what I mean by 5,000 square feet of new development or impervious, that would be, anything, 1997 is the cutoff. Anything before 1997 is grandfather. So if somebody already came to us with a 5,000 square foot, 4,900 square foot development in 2013, then he came back 5 years later with another 4,900 square foot expansion, then the phosphorus methodology kick in. But, so. Greg, the reason we were seeing that if reviewing local ordinances, Manchester's and others, I don't know if Winthrop, I don't think Winthrop has a major minor differentiation, they want. But some of the other ones have.
For commercial development, we have what's called low, medium, and high
Okay,
for commercial development.
oh, yeah, but you don't have like a square foot.
It's not, well, it is actually in there, so above 2,500 square feet, it becomes medium.
Of impervious.
No, 2,500 square foot, we talk about the building.
I know that, yeah, I was on the ordinance
That's where I was-
review, I was on the ordinance review committee. And
That's, I was just trying to get a sense for
No.
like, to make sure it's, that we don't have, like, what is the size project? So if it's 5,000 square feet of impervious, I mean, yeah, Rovers is gonna be what? 40,000 square feet of impervious, I would assume that would be.
But there's already some there, just like there was at TJ's over here, because the gravel parking lot is considered impervious. With the
Is
parking,
that a gravel? I guess it's kind
I
of,
thought you told me it was,
well, it's gravel for a grade, for a part of it, then it's grass and.
but I mean, the question I had was, when Strux was using that, I don't know, it's a public meeting, I don't know if I want to talk.
Oh, no, that was definitely all gravel, that was.
Had been gravel
That was
over,
all there. yes.
okay,
Yes, no, I'm saying Rovers is across from the car wash.
yes,
And it's gravel for a ways, but then it's really kind of getting into grass and,
yeah, I know.
I don't really know if that's, and there's nothing there. There's
I
no
haven't seen, I haven't looked at their plan yet, because they're not on the agenda yet.
They haven't resubmitted since the last time you had that.
And that was how long ago was it?
Well,
And that was just pre-app.
yeah,
Yeah,
Okay, but we sat down with them 2 years ago. When you first started. We
it
met
was
with them.
probably about a year ago.
Was
I've been
that on
here
Zoom?
2 years, yeah.
That was on Zoom.
I think, yeah, it was Zoom, yeah.
Zoom, yeah, we met with them. And I just generally told them that, yeah, if you tear down the building, you get credit for removing the building. If you put something on top of the gravel, but they're mostly building on top of the gravel.
Are they?
Although they're gonna have some parking.
Quite a bit of parking,
yeah,
actually.
Yeah.
a lot of parking.
Yeah, well, I just have to see.
Well, I know their project exceeded the 50% maximum impervious surface. They were 60% and they were trying to take from the 202 buffer. They were saying, well, that's grass. And it's like, but that's not yours. You can't have that. That's not yours. Is what we've had to kind of tell them and say, no, it's 50% impervious. And that's the way we kind of look at it, is those impervious numbers for, especially for residential, to me, that really helps guide us with dealing with the phosphorus. Because that's kind of why they're there in this shoreline zone in particular, to try to help us, limit the amount of phosphorus so that we're not doing phosphorus calculations every time someone puts a
Right.
deck on.
Right.
So,
Our limit to 5,000, I think also from a philosophical standpoint or a combination standpoint was to not strap the small developments, so the mom and pop type developments that are just doing maybe a garage and a little bit of something, but it's commercial, so it has to come here. And it's like the ordinance might say commercial needs to do something. We said, well, we're not gonna hold everyone's feet to the fire at 5,000 feet or less, because quite frankly, a single family residence to do 5,000 square feet with a long driveway, a parking
well,
area.
that's where I was just trying to see
Yeah.
is how flexible that was. The guy came to us that had, he converted and started doing those little paddle boats. He built the looked like a picnic table with a paddle wheel or whatever, and he had to convert to commercial to do that. And we're like, and he just used his existing garage. We're like, sure, but that wouldn't be something, that I would think you need. He didn't physically change the structure, he just changed the use. So that's something I wouldn't expect. I'm just trying to I want to make sure that we know when we need to call you or when we not need to
Well,
call you. And I know there's gonna be some in the gray area, there's gonna be some in the middle where it's like, ooh, that's, potentially really close to a stream, fairly steep slope. This could be, and it's big enough that it could be impactful versus This is not that impact.
right.
So I'm just trying to get a sense. That's all I wanted to make sure. That wasn't a hard rule, like a line of 5,000. It's more of a judgment.
Well, if you neglected or forgot to call me, it wouldn't offend me if it's not that big. I mean,
Yeah,
I've driven by some out here on 202 that I was never made aware of. I don't check every agenda in the planning boards. And planning boards, there's turnover. And sometimes, they have a new chairperson and new members, and they don't know who Copsey Watershed District is. They don't alert us, but the applicant has to go to DEP. And all of a sudden I see this big development out there, and it's like, what happened? Yeah, what happened?
yeah. Very good. Almost that thing.
I appreciate you explaining the fee. Somebody's over I was thinking. Charge a fee and like, charge a fee to let somebody break so off.
I'm not a big fan of this fee. I mean, because you know why I'm not a fan? Because you have to use it to treat stormwater. You can't use it to correct erosion problems. And then you gotta keep it, because it was used to treat from a stormwater plant. It's like, I can't just go arrest or stop erosion. I have to collect water, let's say off of Pond Road in Manchester, direct it down the road to some ditch turnouts and the level spreaders that go into and then plain treatment for Pond Road, which is currently, let's say, not being treated. I can't fix erosion problems on camp roads or roading camp roads or whatever. I think that because they feel that those aren't really permanent fixes, and this is supposed to be a permanent fix. These treatment factors treatments are all supposed to be maintained on that. And if at least you're putting in some kind of an engineered system to treat stormwater, there's also some conditions in there that the property owner who's agreeing to have put on their property is going to maintain. So, but getting back to just about the shoreland developments and that. Why we focus mostly, I don't know if the question was, but focus on things like subdivisions in commercial is because those are the ones that by themselves can really cause a big problem. And one of my philosophies when I got here was a lot of stuff's going to fall through the cracks, catch the big stuff, and you can't do everything.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, see a lot of lawns on the lake. Nice and green right down, but not much you can do for that, I guess, but how big are the holes?
It's probably not as much as it used to be. I think by and large, most lake associations are promoting. And I think now you start to see availability of phosphorus-free fertilizer being sold. We did an Anabesicook project right around the time that DEP was promoting phosphorus-free fertilizers. And I got inventory from Audettes and from Paris Farmers Union to go there when they started selling that to see how successful it was. People were actually requesting the phosphorus-free. Now, I don't know if this is still the case, but I heard from some of them at Scott's, because in Maine, statewide, there's so much of a demand for phosphorus-free is that they were figuring like, we're not gonna break it down phosphorus-free or phosphorus. They were sending almost all phosphorus-free to Maine, so I understand. And I don't know, I have to check with the golf course.
So that's okay to you, basically?
Yeah, I think so. Well, it's better than using
Yeah.
something that phosphorus.
The other thing.
And also, Don, you don't want a bad lawn that's gonna erode. If you're gonna have a lawn, you want it to be at least strong root systems and everything else. Right.
No, there's, used to come to the association meeting,
Robin?
yeah. And promote, shrubs and all.
Oh, yeah.
Not everybody belongs to that.
They used to, before Scott's was bringing in phosphorus-free fertilizer, there was someplace at Turner or something with manufacturing it. Strux was selling, it was expensive. It was locally made on small scale. And now I have one in my house, but I also have probably the best buffer on Copsey Lake. I can't see my house from the water at all. And even down in my house, it's like, I've been living there 10 years, but my wife has been living there since 1980, and in the late 80s, DEP used my property for a videotape of how the shorefront should be buffered. And my neighbors, and I'm not gonna say who they are, you may know a lot of them, Longfellow Lane. But they're all like, Bill, you gotta cut the trees, you can see the lake. I said, I like seeing the lake through trees. I can go down to the water and see the lake. And I grew up in Wisconsin, lived in Milwaukee, right near Lake Michigan. It's a nice, big, beautiful lake, but when you're standing there, you're looking at expansive water, it just looks like water. I like structure, you know? Pine trees.
Well, I got a nice lawn, mostly.
Okay, all right.
Because when I moved here, I got there and I.
Listen, I've taken a lot of time today, folks.
Never fertilized.
And I'm not running out on it either. It's but
Yeah.
But I just wanna, can you address that question? I'm not really sure what it.
oh, Pigeon Pond for the fire station. What was that?
I don't know.
You were talking about Ruper's at the time, I believe,
Yeah,
and about maybe counting area within the right of way on 202. I think it was back around that part of the discussion.
Okay.
Right, we're evaluating a lot, we evaluate the lot that they own, not. If there's green space adjacent, they don't get to count that.
oh, no,
So
no,
that
no,
was all we were saying, is that Ropers was trying to use the 202 buffer. And he's like, no, that's not yours.
no,
You
that's
get
right.
to include that in your lot.
Because yeah. Well, yeah, there's all woods down below. Yeah, but if you don't own it, you can't guarantee that it's gonna be that.
Well, exactly. Well, they might expand and make it a huge road. Who knows? You know?
Tension pond for the fire station.
Is it in the right of way?
No.
Sorry, Jen.
No,
Oh, it's well.
I don't.
that parallels the road. Yeah.
Done.
I am for now.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Well, thank you for your
Yeah, thank you.
patience going through that. That's my first time I've presented that. Those weren't my slides,
Fix now,
except for the pictures of Winthrop and that.
fix now.
Yeah. Yes, it's awesome. No.
You didn't know.
Thank you very much.
We par for the course for 35 slides.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
Good note.
I'm sorry, if I may, I have. I'm sure you have a more recent one, but this is, you mentioned earlier, your phosphorus review policy, and it speaks to the threshold of subdivisions and the 5,000 square feet. What I'd like to do is have whatever that version or updated version and get it online. So that when we point people to them, we can also say, here's what they're gonna help you walk through. But I want to make sure that it's correct and to see what
Yeah.
you all thought of that.
Yeah, I do say in there, the policy applies to major developments. And CWD defines these projects as residential and commercial that results in a creation of 5,000 or more square feet of impervious. You want me to, this is the most recent.
It is the most recent.
Yeah.
Okay, then what I'm gonna do is I've already scanned it. I'm gonna incorporate that into the website, into the process
Do
of.
you want me to email you?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Hey,
Great.
Awesome.
And we need, oh geez, I'm sorry, yes.
Thank you, Bill.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you very much. I think it's been a little long overdue. Like I say, before there was a slowdown in development, either because of the economy or COVID or something. I used to come here a lot more and to all the planning boards. Things are starting to really pick up every day. Almost too much. So my conference room table is stacked with development project. And I'm always now I'm trying to make sure that I don't tick somebody off by not getting to them in time. So for the planning board agenda, so. Need more staff.
Hey, John, you wanna share with us? Information,
The what information? I'm sorry?
application process.
Oh, sure. So this is just a continued discussion. I think this came about initially because I was concerned about how to interpret and apply the ordinance around commercial uses. And so Greg had drawn up a document that would help people walking through that process. And ultimately, it guides them to the planning board if it's gray, right? If it's too gray. And then in addition to that, I created a draft that just walks through the whole conditional use process in general. And I'll have to say, there's hyperlinks in it, except for, I don't have anything to hyperlink to Copper Watershed District 2 yet because they don't have a website, but it sounds like they're on it. Yeah. And some of these links, I linked them to documents that are not actually posted or live yet. They're still in draft format, but you could see where they went. So there's the two pieces. There's the commercial. Thank you. Oh, did Mark leave? Because I wanted him to speak to the whole 50% of the value.
It's there.
There was the question on the 50% value. So do you mind if I just see if I can catch him?
Yeah, that would be a good one.
Yeah.
Look at the file.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it'd be restoration, but I think there'd be improvement. I think you're right. It's just, yeah, very subjective, I think. So his thought would be helpful to interpret.
I missed him, but we've talked to him. He's happy to come and talk to you all. So we can get him another night. But in relation to the 50%, the floodplain was even more clear than the shoreline in terms of those cumulative impacts of improvements like windows and roof, and they do add up. Those do count towards the 50% in the floodplain. And then it was a little more gray outside of that, and that's why I wanted to have him speak to that.
Domain. I don't know if that was the same technique he used, or was it, I didn't know, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted to ask that question. Just think it would be helpful to understand that from our perspective of what gets classified. with.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Because it is a very, very subjective topic.
And he understands the question and that you like that feedback. So I'll follow up with him and see if we can have him come to another meeting. So let's see. So there was the commercial piece, there was just the overall, so if you have a subdivision, conditional use, or if you want to just come to request, a pre-application, here's the process. That was the second document, intention. Checklist, so they would submit online for a request for hearing. And then this checklist that goes along with it. And I actually have a separate checklist for subdivision, which is very similar. So just the submittal package, this is what that would look like. And then when you had a site walk recently, I just pulled information from your bylaws and then added on some things. So this was pretty much what I had given you for the site walk. There's a couple of changes, but this was not actually anything you ever formally adopted. So I just wanted to present it and see if you guys would endorse it. You haven't had a chance probably to look at it enough. I don't know if you have, but.
Yeah, but looked at it. I thought you should, like, God,
Mhm.
these kind of samples. Examples of the. Like a drawing. That's what you and I.
Yes, I've put a few samples, but yeah, we get yes, correct.
What we committed to do. What would it consider to be bring that? See how, can you do that too?
That's great, yeah.
So the idea is that that checklist should have all the elements that you want. So we'll work on the samples, but if you could confirm that the checklist is inclusive of everything that you
And
want.
you may have to get small quantity. What's the example? I don't think I have.
Yeah.
Just one. I think, at least that going into it, if I was you, I'd have 3 in my head. If you end up with 2 and think you can cover with 2, go with that. But 4 or 5 just seems too many. And I know there's some nuances that would be nice to capture, but I just think it would just be too much for somebody to go. If you just said, hey, it's a small project, here's what we're looking for, a larger project, then here's a complete rebuild or complete something. There's maybe a lot more involved. That, a lot of times we're looking for a lot, someone's building a brand new house in the shoreline, tearing one down, we probably would want pretty detailed information about what they're doing.
As a shop list, if it's out of this package for recommendation. Or, I use it without station. For instance, when I do plotline building, I use Excel. What are other common softwares or applications that a person trying to do it themselves or
Here's some examples. Just
Are there any
look through
other at all?
I could think of a lot. I mean, QGIS is a free online GIS program.
What did you say? Q,
QGIS.
like the letter Q?
The letter Q, GIS, it's a simple process. I think, we talk about like the main parcel viewer, I've talked about that before, the main floodplain, or not main, but the FEMA's map service center. Those are providing us some of that information just on the actual ortho photo, so it's pretty hard to say we can see what's there. The parcel viewer is great because it puts the property lines on it, and they have disclaimers on there that it may not be perfect, and things like that, just like the tax maps, there could be some errors, but at least to give you that sense of size, it gives you that perspective, and it lets you see the trees and see the lot from the aerial photo, so that you have a sense, so that you wouldn't have to do a site visit.
Where do you find that?
That's a main GIS product, so if you just type main parcel viewer into Google, it'll come up on the top.
What was the other one?
It's the office of GIS, main office of GIS.
QGIS.
QGIS is a program where you could actually download, so what you find in the parcel viewers is an online tool that you can kind of zoom in and move. You can actually export those tax maps as a layer. And now in QGIS, you can now put on an ortho photo, which is that aerial photography that you see from Google. You can look at a topo map. You can look at the LiDAR data underneath, or the wetlands. Once you get into QGIS, you can download from the main office of GIS. They have all those layers available. And that's maybe for a moderate, higher level user. But if they're really getting into, hey, I want to show they're doing a perfect project, they should be using some type of GIS software to show us.
And they're gonna be higher one.
Yeah.
Do that. So, but like when we ask for solar farms, they have to do, not watershed view, but the view shed analysis. That has to be done in GIS. You can't do that any other way.
Mhm.
So we're already making that assumption, but those are all gonna be perfect. So I think
By
that's.
the way, we were tools, so QGIS, I mentioned Excel, FEMA map service, main parcel viewer, did I miss one?
Those are good tools to kind of start with, so, yeah.
And it's easy to provide links to those on the website.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's other free services out there. I mean, there's other fancier drawing programs and things like that. There's two different CAD programs that are free that you can use online, but that starts to be, again, it's sort of like QGIS. You really have to kind of understand a little bit of what you're doing. Like you have to understand your coordinate systems and what spatial reference and, then there's even the 3D viewers, and I mean, I don't want to get into too many things. Give them some options. I think that's where giving them some examples to be like, hey, and even if one of them's a good hand drawing, there's nothing wrong with a hand drawing. They don't need to hire anybody to do that. They just need to take their time and use a ruler and draw straight lines. It's not.
Pick the graph.
Exactly. Get graph paper, whatever. It's, even if you didn't use graph paper and you just use,
Yeah.
you drew, the thing we're missing a lot, right, is how far are you from the sideline? How far are you from the water? How far are you from the road? Like, what are your property dimensions and where's your project going? And it's like, that seems to be missing for some of the projects.
Graph paper might help them get it a little more in
Yeah.
the scale.
Right.
Perfect, but.
Right. Sometimes people feel like they have to draw to scale and that they struggle with that, but.
Relatively,
Yeah.
And you asked that I put in approximately about to scale specifically, and I can print a tax, like go online and print the tax, but I can't do it to any specific scale. So if sometimes maybe that would be acceptable for
The
you.
main parts, they actually have two tools there, one for area, one for distance. You literally just click and it tells you how far.
Oh, the measure, yeah,
So
yeah.
it measures for you. So if you're measuring like how far is the house from the water, I do that before I come here sometimes. kind of like, oh, it's 111 feet to the house. I'm like, I want to know before they show up what the dimensions are. So, see, if you can see the house, if it's covered with trees, you can't always tell.
Yeah,
So.
I'm sorry.
Are we waiting for that?
I didn't see him in there. I don't think he's gonna,
Let's go to other business now. Any other business?
I'm panicking. Hold on, I do a little bit of other business. Um. Apologize, let me just double check here. So just in terms of moving forward with your schedule, there aren't any applications for the next meeting. Two came in that were incomplete and the others were from before that weren't complete. So I think they're probably all gonna come in around the same time, but they should be complete because I've sent them back. So,
That's good.
yeah, yeah.
Wasted.
Did I mention the self-storage one to you?
You mentioned that they,
Oh,
we don't know. I don't know.
Royal, yeah, so 107 Royal, and it's behind the car wash. They're looking to split off. And but it was very little information, so there's not much I can tell you at this point when they come back.
No. Pretty faulty about that.
There's a lot of fun.
Salts for sure.
So the two meetings in April, one's already a workshop, and then one is, there's no application. So on the things that you weighted, there's a couple things that seem appropriate that would go together and kind of feed off this discussion you had tonight, is regarding natural resources, and talked about water quality, so surface water quality, and talked about looking at your existing regulations around roads, probably parking areas. I mean, we can look at whatever we have for improvements, definitely subdivision regulations around road construction and maintenance, private roads.
Can you get to the?
So I was hoping, Mark and I tried to get them in April for two meetings away, but it's school vacation. So he can't come. So Mark was here earlier and talked to Rick, and he's gonna just see when he can come, and it's likely not gonna be a night of a workshop, but we'll all, you're invited to attend and participate. So I will let you know when that's gonna occur. He was gonna try, yeah, that maybe he was available then.
Talk about me.
So then what I would like to do, if that's the direction you want to head, like you mentioned, low impact development tonight, lid standards. I'd like to put some information together, another piece that's in your table of goals and objectives that you want to complete is looking at maximum impervious surfaces. You have them, but there's a goal to reevaluate that, right? So I'd like to provide information around that, and I'll narrow it down more and talk to Rick about it, but you don't have to answer me right now, but I just want to make sure when you look at that, what we're doing moving forward, that I'm working on what you'd like to be working on, providing you information. So that would be around surface water quality, in regards to infrastructure, parking, roads, et cetera.
They measure whether you can do that 30% expansion in the shoreline zone. It's like, can we come up with, is there an easy way to come up with that benchmark?
I talked to the assessor about that, and on the surface, there wasn't a layer, there was no obvious, easy way to do that. So I can pursue it more, but I was hopeful that he would just say, oh, yeah.
Well, I just want, like, I mean, you use the tax book for 1983 and said, that's what your that's the baseline. And I don't know how good those numbers are. I don't know. I mean, but they do have your square footage. But that's livable square footage, so it's gotta kind of pay attention to 2 stories or
Yeah.
1, how big that house might be. I don't know how much information is in there. So
So
now they have the site sketch and all of that.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I'm sure that didn't exist in 1880.
there's photos sometimes in the older records, but you have a new town clerk I've mentioned, and she's gonna be doing all the records maintenance, and we've talked a number of times about how that will look. And, you know, in terms of fireproof vault and so on, but right now, there's a bunch of stuff out in the back room here. So there's tax maps. There's all kinds of documentation, and there may be something that we could identify that and then
Well,
preserve
I
it
know-
better.
I know town- I was in the 90s, whatever, it's like they had the tax book. I
Yeah,
had to go in and like flip through the book to see, and it would say your house and and all of that. When they did the assessment, they would update that.
let me see what I can find.
So if they just had an old, I'm sure it's, you know, like, who would keep that? So, but just thinking if that existed, it might have some of those numbers on it.
We have a lot of stuff out there. It very well could. It's a matter of going through and then making sure that everything is preserved moving forward. And that's what
Yeah,
Deb will do a
and-
great
and
job.
again, just because there's that time stamp on it, if we had something to go back to and say, hey, in 1985 or whatever year we came up with, it says this property was 1,400 square feet, and you're saying it's right now 2,200 square feet, you're already, that house has been expanded on.
And when you say the year, we're talking about the year that the state drew the line.
Yeah,
that-
anything from the year that stayed through the line to when we can find something
Yeah.
in your pile.
Okay,
So we want to go backwards, as close to that line as we can. If we can't get there, like I said, if it's 1983, you find 1985's book, okay, that's better than nothing. We obviously would want the 1983 book, but you know, if we can't
Yeah.
find all of them, we just happen to find one of them. I'm saying, don't be picky. Even the 1990 book or something like that could be.
some is better than none. Yeah,
Exactly, it would give us something to look at to know, hey, that house, you know, they're coming in saying it's 2,200 square feet. We're looking at the tax map from 1990 and it says it was 1,200. We're like, you've already expanded the 30%. You don't get any more expansion. Like, it doesn't matter if it happened in 1991, sorry. Because you can't tell by looking at a property. You know, you can if it's maybe a couple of years old and the building's really old, but we just don't, you know, it's again, that accumulative, every year they come in and they add on 10%. Keeps track of that.
yeah.
And then the more you
Yeah.
do that, the more 10% is. And you have an 800 square foot camp that turns into 8,000 in 11 years if you did it, you know, exponentially.
Hmm.
10% a year. So, I mean, so that's really all we're trying to get at, is that just seems like a missing piece of our puzzle. And if we could find something in the old records to use as a benchmark, it may give us some indicator.
I understand the goal.
15, that exactly.
Well, that's exactly what can happen, right?
We got back to what, 90s, right? Yeah, and that's, that should be the perfect thing.
Right.
Yeah. Gone.
I guess if you could all just put some think on if the direction for the next couple of meetings appears to be the right direction in terms of surface water quality and development around that, then I can get some materials to discuss. So if you think I'm in the wrong track, just send me an email. I'm sorry?
Next one is this, the guidance.
Correct.
So the goal would be, these are guidance documents. Our goal would be view these, come in with our edits. Make live edits if we wanted to, and then say, yeah, we're good with them. And then because they're guidance, they're not ordinances, we wouldn't have to.
That's it. Post them.
We just have to post.
Mhm.
We're done.
This is, can I ask you a question on that?
And I'm learning a lot about the iWorks permit management system, and there's a lot there that's gonna be so helpful. But we have to input the data, you know,
Is this the one we're going to use as a checklist?
that's the proposal.
What are these?
That's- What are they?
These are for the applicant.
Well, that's the thing is, once you look at, if you like the information, there's a number of things that could be done. It could be on the screen, planning board. It could be the text that you actually see. It could be hyperlinked, or tabs in the side. It could be hyperlinked within documents. Whatever is the most user friendly.
But this would be
That would be
commercial and
subdivision, well, no, a similar one for subdivision, but
this would be for commercial individual.
anything, unless it's just a discussion, if they want to request a hearing to just to have a pre-sketch discussion, because we've already determined that there would be no fee, and you don't want them to invest in a design, because then you're gonna be hard pressed to get them to change it. Yeah,
This is basically thinking, maybe not in it, but possibly everything in here for either commercial or individual landlord.
yes.
Subdivision would be different.
And so the idea being that they check it off, because I just get those checklists back with nothing on them. So they have to check it and they have to address it one way or another, either check or not applicable and state why. I mean, it'll be obvious in some instances, but
Yeah, I was looking at some of these that
I got your
Why?
comment.
apply to commercial, but not necessarily.
Yeah, we don't want to be unreasonable. I think that's,
Go ahead.
yeah.
I looked at this. We're probably, we won't get any more applicants.
I mean, I could make separate check, I could just break it out so that it's not as daunting, maybe like shoreline checklist or, and commercial subdivision. We could do that.
Yeah. With that, say, if you're doing commercial in shoreline, you need to do checklists A, B, and C.
Yeah,
If you're doing, just some, like a little bit of, or if you're just doing residential improvement, no matter what, you have to do checklist A.
Yeah,
And if you're doing, residential in the shoreline zone, you have to do A and B. And if you're doing commercial, you have to do A and C or something like that.
Yeah.
And then if they happen to be the freak person that's trying to do commercial in shoreline, they have to do all three.
yeah.
But I wouldn't think that would be happening very often.
But the
Probably
individual
Marina.
really need all that.
Well, no, but they would, like, everybody needs to do A.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody does A.
But they don't need a
And then-
traffic study and all that.
Yeah, exactly.
I need to have-
And it just separate.
Explain why they don't need to have that.
Right, but if you made it kind of like right on top of that, here checklist A, here checklist B, here C.
That is kind of what,
That would just help, I think, people navigate it.
and this is just kind of backup. These things here, I guess, right?
Yeah, those are intended to help explain the process and how to get to this, to this checklist.
Yeah.
It's an aid for an
Yeah.
Yes, and then this is the actual submission.
And that's the site visit.
Hearing all the building questions, or nothing at all.
We'll do it here.
Well, second.
Moving second.
Oh, you're gonna second it? I'll say it.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Okay, so am I.
I do have one more thing.
You want feedback?